The first is the topic of telos. So telos is a very important word in ancient Greek, very important in the philosophy of Aristotle in particular. The telos is the end, purpose, or goal of an object or a thing. So, the Greeks, they'd sit around, they say, well, what is the telos of a knife? The telos of a knife is to cut, and therefore, if this knife does not cut, well, it is not a good knife. So what's the telos of a physician? Well, we can ask that about any profession. What is the telos of a doctor or a scholar or a judge or a lawyer? And I think it's pretty clear. The telos of medicine is health. And if a physician does not bring about health in his patients, then he is no good physician. And if a judge does not deliver justice, then she is no good judge. Now, there are other professions. These here are not closed guilds like the ones on top, but they certainly strive for some sort of a purpose. Business, we might say the purpose of business is profit. Now that I teach in a business school, I have a bit more of a nuanced view that the purpose of business is ultimately to create value, to create some sort of good or service that people need, so you create value. But of course, a businessman who creates value for others and doesn't make any money for him or herself is not a very good business person. So we can speak of that as the telos. And there are many people who join organizations that work for social justice. And I think the telos of social justice, I'm recording it here as racial equality, because that's the most passionate one in this country at this time. But that is meant to include gender equality, LGBT rights, environmental issues, the whole set of issues that are pursued by social justice activists. Now, these different fields interact. They each have their own excellence, their own expertise, and as they go about their business, they make life better for others. So it's very easy to see this, that business helps us all. You cannot be a doctor, scholar, lawyer, or judge without relying on hundreds or thousands of businesses to do your job. So here are three of my favorite companies, because boy, do they save me time. Boy, do they make me a better scholar. I could not imagine doing my work, as I did in grad school without these companies. So these companies help me achieve my telos. And of course, all these other fields return the favor. Obviously, businesses rely on doctors to keep their costs low, on research of all sorts, especially in the sciences, and on justice and lawyers and judges. So each field helps the other to be excellent by using its own excellence. We can say the same thing about social justice. When social justice activists point out that Black and white patients are not treated the same, that maybe Black patients are not recommended as much for an expensive treatment, whatever it is, if doctors are treating people differently based on their category for no good medical reason, it's not just a violation of racial equality, it's also a violation of their telos. They're not healing as well as they could. So social justice activists hold people's feet to the fire, they find discrepancies, they point them out, they help scholars do better work. Here are the areas you're not studying, here's how you've been studying it wrong. So again, each field pursuing its own telos helps others achieve theirs. So that's great, that's constructive interaction. You might just call it the division of labor. And of course, the other fields return the favor and help social justice activists to be effective. But there's another kind of interaction. This is what really concerns me. It happens often that one field injects its telos into another. So I teach a business ethics course at NYU, and a lot of our cases are cases wherever business rubs up against professors, researchers, doctors, lawyers, you know what's going to happen. People get corrupted and they stop pursuing their telos, they start pursuing profit. Doctors increasingly in this country are running businesses, are looking at patients as profit centers, and are thinking, how can I bill for more? Now, this is a direct violation of their telos. This is corruption. The most dramatic case I've seen recently with really historical effects is this one. A couple weeks ago in the New York Times, we learned that you were all raised thinking that fat was bad for you, right? When you were kids, you were told, cut out the fat. Well, that was never true. There was never good evidence for that. The reason why you were taught that is because in the 1960s, there was a trade group, the Sugar Research Foundation. I'm sure they were full of very careful researchers. And they basically bribed or paid, they bought some Harvard scientists to write a review. They didn't just say, here, please write a review. They said, well, here are the studies we want you to review. Now, that is such a violation of the scholar's telos. To do a lit review where you say, you tell me which studies your industry wants to review, we'll write favorably, done, give us the money. That is such corruption. And that led to the government adopting policies saying, the food pyramid, have lots of starches and only a little bit of fat, which is exactly backwards. Fat isn't bad for you. Fat isn't even fattening. Starches and sugars are what's fattening. They create a big insulin reaction, then you store the fat. But if you eat fat, you get full quickly, and you don't eat that much. So fat was never fattening. It was never bad for you. Complete myth, led to an explosion. There were other factors. But this error, this scientific error, is one of the reasons why we had an explosion of obesity in the United States. And it especially affected Black women. Black women's obesity rates shot up more than any other group. So even racial injustice, racial inequalities came about because these three scholars betrayed their telos. So that is a destructive interaction. And what I'd like to argue now is that the same thing can happen when social justice injects its telos into other fields. When everybody is thinking about how to improve racial equality rather than their telos, that is corruption. Now, you may not think that it's as bad. It doesn't seem as bad. It seems good compared to profit as your motive. But as I'll show, it can lead to disastrous consequences, especially for the very people you're trying to help.